Connor Green, a golden boy in Brookhaven, is unwittingly drugged, and I end up being the cure for his predicament. It's exactly a month later when I discover that I'm pregnant during a routine medical examination. Upon learning the news, Connor offers me $50 million to carry the baby to term, and then another $10 million to take full custody of the child. It's then that Julie Sutton, my so-called righteous friend, persuades me to terminate the pregnancy, saying, "You ought to know that money isn't everything, Queenie. If you throw away your dignity for just $60 million, then you're no better than those women who entertain men in clubs." In my past life, I had an abortion at Julie's suggestion and pursued legal action against Connor, accusing him of assault. I later sought financial assistance and support from Julie after my parents fell gravely ill. But Julie slapped me hard across the face instead. "Your parents are seriously ill, and instead of figuring things out on your own, you come running to me, huh? You're truly shameless, Queenie." Julie broke off our friendship right then, and I also lost the lawsuit against Connor. I couldn't afford the treatment, so my parents' lives were cut short by their illnesses. In the end, the grief of losing them was too much, so I decided to take my own life by jumping off a rooftop. When I open my eyes, I find myself returning to the day Julie tried to persuade me to get an abortion. Chapter 1. If you take that money, then you're no better than a hooker, Queenie York. You know that those wealthy men just love to take advantage of young women, and by agreeing, you're only enabling their terrible behavior. You're not going to accept his money, right, Queenie? Julie Sutton asked. I gaped at Julie, whose face was flushed from anger. I then glanced at Connor Green, a golden boy in Brookhaven, who was standing there with a check for $50 million. It was then that I realized that I had been reborn, sent back to the very day I discovered that I was pregnant. Upon noticing my silence, Julie grew visibly anxious. She took my hand and said earnestly, "You ought to know that money isn't everything, Queenie. If you sell yourself out for just $50 million, then you're no better than those escorts working in clubs. You must not keep this baby. It's a disaster waiting to happen and will eventually destroy your whole life. You ought to know that even though we are broke, we should at least hold on to our dignity. You can't let those wealthy people walk all over us." Julie stood up straight with a look of righteous determination, as if she were the very personification of morality. I, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine as I looked at her. I couldn't let her have her way this time, so I pulled my hand from Julie's grasp and accepted the check in Connor's hand. "You can rest assured that I won't tell anyone about this. I'll hand over the child once it's born. I came from an impoverished family, and I had only been able to stay in school because of my grades and the scholarships I had received. I was already pregnant, anyway, so there was no point in being fussy about it. I couldn't make $50 million in a lifetime, so I would have been an absolute idiot to turn down that kind of money." Upon hearing that, Connor looked visibly relieved. Julie, on the other hand, went ballistic, firing questions at me. "What on earth are you thinking, Queenie? How could you possibly agree to have his baby? You need to come with me to the police station right now and get an abortion. These monsters need to be held accountable." I found that her furious roars sounded like nothing more than shrill clamor to me. "You ought to know that my parents are still slogging away on a construction site and my family is dirt poor. If I can get $50 million for this baby, then why wouldn't I take that deal?" Julie's eyes widened in disbelief as she fixed her gaze on me. "You should know that there's a right and wrong way to make money. Your parents would be so ashamed of you that they'd disown you if they ever found out about this. You'd also be setting a terrible example for everyone. You ought to know that we may be poor, but we have our pride, and we're not going to sell our souls just for some money." I wouldn't fall for her sanctimonious nonsense this time. I smiled faintly, tucked the check into my handbag, and said indifferently, "You don't need to concern yourself with this. If I had taken this check in my past life, I wouldn't have ended up with a broken family and a ruined life. I wasn't going to be that much of a fool again in this life, letting her tell me what to do." Chapter 2. Having handed over the $50 million check, Connor added, "I'll transfer the remaining $10 million once the baby is born." I nodded with pleasure, thinking that wealthy people really knew how to get things done. In my past life, I had taken Julie's advice and made a huge public spectacle of the situation, even taking Connor to court. He had proof that he had been drugged and wasn't in his right mind, though, so he got off scot-free while I lost every last dime my family had trying to fight him in court. Thus, when my parents fell seriously ill later on, I had nothing left to help pay for their treatment. Upon hearing that, Julie crossed her arms and tooted. "You'd better listen up here, Connor. Don't assume that just because you're Brookhaven's heir that people from poor families like ours will grovel before you. Queenie is just having a moment of weakness right now. I'll make sure she chooses the path of righteousness as long as I'm here by her side." I couldn't help but find it absolutely hilarious as I listened to her self-righteous speech. If I hadn't personally witnessed her throwing herself at wealthy heirs after I died in my past life, I might have actually believed her. Having said his piece, Connor realized that we had taken a cab over, so he offered to give us a ride back. I was just about to nod and accept his offer when Julie started her performance once more. "You ought to know that even though we come from poverty and can't afford a car, we still have our dignity. We're not going to freeload off wealthy people like you." She held her head high, a look of haughty righteousness in her gaze. "You'd better not think that your money gives you the right to do whatever you want. You see, we poor people have dignity." I cut her short before she could go on with her act, saying, "Thanks for the ride, Mr. Green. It's too late to hail a cab, so I'll have to trouble you to give me a ride back. Why would I pay for a cab when I could get a free ride in a Rolls Royce?" I had never ridden in one before, so I didn't see the harm in it. Julie suddenly grabbed my arm after hearing that, asking, "What nonsense are you saying, Queenie? I know we're poor, but that doesn't mean we can throw away our pride. How can you allow yourself to be so readily bewitched by a mere luxury car?" I couldn't help but feel a wave of nausea, looking at her pained expression. Just then, Connor opened the car door for me. Seeing that, I merely flashed Julie a brilliant smile, saying, "You're right. I'm completely bewitched by it. I'm hopping on the fancy ride and leaving first." I then got in the car and looked out the window. Julie's eyes brimmed with tears as she asked me pitifully, "You're not just going to abandon me here, are you, Queenie? What am I supposed to do now?" I glanced at her with disdain and asked, Haven't you been clamoring about having dignity or something? Upon seeing Julie reach for the car door, I quickly added, you'd better not think about it. You wouldn't want to lose all that dignity of yours by sitting in a fancy car, Julie. Julie was left speechless by my remark, her face turning pale with a mix of fury and shock. Get moving, Connor instructed his chauffeur. I glanced at the rearview mirror and watched as the cold wind whipped around Julie, making her look like a fool. Connor, concerned for the baby, reached out and helped me as I stepped out of the car. I went straight upstairs as soon as I got into the house. I was eager to see the check Connor gave me, as I had never had one before. Yet, the moment I reached home, I discovered that the check was missing. Chapter 3. I searched through my handbag for a while, but the check was nowhere to be found. It hit me then that Julie had touched my handbag earlier just as I was leaving. I immediately tried to call her, only to find that her phone was turned off. I quickly rushed downstairs, hailed a cab, and went straight to her place. I noticed that she wasn't home yet, so I waited outside. It wasn't long before Julie showed up, looking completely drenched from the rain. Upon seeing me, Julie immediately sneered. I figured once you got in Mr. Green's Rolls Royce, you'd be swept up by the luxury and wouldn't be seen again. You ought to know that being a rich man's wife isn't easy, Queenie. Those people will use you up until there's nothing left. I never noticed before how little integrity you had, selling yourself for money. It's a good thing that you have me here by your side. I'll show you the right way to live and what it means to be a person of real honor. I wasn't in the mood to listen to her ramblings. I went right up to her and asked, is the check with you? Julie's expression faltered slightly before returning to calm. What check? Why would I have a check that wasn't even meant for me? I knew her far too well to be fooled, able to tell right away that she was lying. I took out my phone and pretended to call the police, saying, in that case, since the check is missing, someone must have stolen it. I'll just have to call the police, then. I barely finished my sentence when Julie suddenly snatched my phone away in a panic. What's the big deal? Why are you calling the police over something so trivial? That check was never supposed to be yours, anyway. Do you even know what kind of trouble you're getting yourself into? You're just setting yourself up for disaster. I merely snorted in response, knowing that my family would be done for without that check. I held out my hand and demanded, you'd better hand over the check, Julie. Otherwise, I'm calling the police. Julie, though exposed, didn't even show the slightest hint of shame. Instead, she bristled with indignation, asking, you don't seriously think I took that check for myself, do you? I cocked my brow and asked, why did you take it? Then, Julie looked at me, pretending to be disappointed. I was only trying to keep you from going astray, Queenie. I mean, we might be poor, but we're not without honor. Dignity and integrity are more important than anything in this life. What's the difference between selling yourself for money and being nothing more than a shell of a person? I cut her off mid-sentence and thrust my hand into her coat pocket. Julie frantically held onto the check, refusing to let go. You've completely lost your mind over money, Queenie. You'll stay lost in your delusions forever if I don't step in. She then moved in a flash, ripping the check to shreds. You'll finally be able to think straight now that the check is gone. You can't just lose all sense of right and wrong for money, Queenie. I saw a flicker of satisfaction crossing her eyes after she tore the check. Julie thought that she had won and left me with nothing, but she couldn't have been more wrong. It was from that day onward that Julie kept calling and texting me, using every excuse imaginable to pressure me into getting an abortion. In the meantime, she was also busy doing something else, building up her holier-than-thou persona on Instagram, all while making sure I couldn't see it by blocking me. It was Connor who told me about this. There Julie was, telling me to keep my distance from him, all while secretly following him on Instagram behind my back as my best friend. Julie's Instagram posts were mostly pictures of her hard at work at her desk, with captions full of positive platitudes. Never lose your dignity, even when you're poor and exhausted. Build your own future, and do not give in to temptations. You can do it. You can be the main character of your own story. Connor then forwarded me surveillance footage from his company. It showed Julie waiting for a long time outside his company until he finally came out. She then walked up to him, only to twist her ankle in her high heel, tumbling straight into his arms. She immediately pulled away with her head held high, saying, you'd better not think you can use money to get to me just because I'm Queenie's friend. You ought to know that even if we're poor, we still have our pride. We won't sell our dignity for money. Connor stared at Julie with an expression reserved for a fool before snapping, security. I couldn't help but burst out laughing after seeing that.